The piercing wail of ambulance sirens shattered the calm of Valentine's night in Brampton, Ontario. February 14, 2024, 11:47 p.m. Most couples should have been celebrating love, but tonight, that love was ripped apart by the violence of betrayal and desperation. Red and blue lights danced across the snow-covered duplex on Torbram Road, casting eerie shadows on the modest homes that lined the street. Homes where dreams were built, but tonight, shattered. Officer Sarah Mitchell was first on the scene, her breath visible in the freezing night air as she stepped out of her patrol car. Frantic 911 calls had come in from neighbors, screaming in multiple languages, an unsettling chorus of Hindi, Punjabi, and English that made the situation all the more confusing. They were familiar sounds, voices from families who had come to Canada in search of a better life, now trapped in the violence of their own community. Sarah had responded to countless domestic disputes in her decade of service, but this was different. The apartment door hung ajar like the mouth of a predator, frozen mid-scream. She pushed it open cautiously, the smell of blood and panic hitting her before the sight. What lay inside would haunt her for years. The apartment was a scene of madness. Papers scattered across the floor, evidence of a hidden world none had suspected existed. Dozens of forged immigration documents, fake employment letters, fraudulent bank statements, and even counterfeit marriage certificates lay strewn across the blood-stained linoleum. The careful chaos told a tragic tale, a story of dreams turned to dust, of desperation that had finally boiled over into violence. This wasn't just a domestic dispute gone wrong. This was the violent end to a carefully orchestrated immigration scam that had been brewing for 3 long years. What started as one student's desperate plan to secure permanent residency had now become the Valentine's Day massacre, the bloody conclusion to a scheme so well thought out, it had ensnared an entire community. But as Officer Mitchell surveyed the room, a chilling realization began to sink in. What looked like a senseless crime wasn't just the result of greed or anger. It was a calculated trap that had been set months, even years, in the making. This tragedy was not just about one victim. It was about the systems and pressures that had driven people to the edge. It was about the dark underbelly of Canada's international student system, and the lengths to which some would go to escape the grip of the impossible. Vikram Sharma, at 26, embodied every immigrant's hope and every parent's sacrifice. A lean figure in a second-hand winter jacket, he walked the campus of Conestoga College, the weight of expectations pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had arrived in Canada from Jalandhar, Punjab, in September 2021, carrying not just textbooks, but the hopes of an entire family who had sold their ancestral land for $35,000 to fund his education. That's some covered tuition, but left little else for the rest of his life here. Living in a basement apartment with 3 other students, Vikram's world consisted of a mattress on the floor, instant noodles, and the occasional free meal from the Gadwar. Despite working part-time at a pro-Canada station, his financial stress was crushing. With his student visa set to expire in 6 months and his grades slipping under the pressure, Vikram could no longer hide the fact that his dream of a Canadian future was slipping away. Every night, he called home, watching his parents' hopeful faces on the screen, unable to tell them that the investment they had made, their land, their savings, their sacrifices, was rapidly deteriorating. His father, a small-time farmer, had placed everything on Vikram's success. Yet here he was, barely holding it all together, struggling to even pass his courses. Simon Kaur, 24, had come to Canada in 2020 to study business at Sheridan College. Unlike many of her peers, she had found a way to balance work and studies, her job at Tim Hortons making her a familiar face to hundreds of international students. Her life was a daily juggling act, working shifts behind the counter, studying for exams, and sending money back home to her aging parents in Amritsar. Her family, once middle class, had sacrificed everything to give her this chance. Her father had worked as a government clerk, her mother a school teacher. They had both given up their retirement savings to ensure Simon's success. Simon's dream wasn't just about herself. She wanted to bring her parents to Canada before their health deteriorated. Her student visa, however, was rapidly expiring in 8 months. She believed her strong academic record and job experience would provide the right opportunities. But even with all her optimism, the looming shadow of her visa expiration clouded everything. It was in this period of vulnerability, amidst a community of immigrants facing the same stresses, that their paths crossed. At a Diwali celebration in 2023, Vikram stood reluctantly against the wall, nursing a cup of chai. He had been dragged along by his roommates, who insisted he couldn't work himself into the ground without taking a break. But the ache of homesickness hung heavy. Then, through the crowded room, he saw her. Simon was dancing with a group of girls, her bright lehenga swirling with the rhythm of a traditional Punjabi song. Her laughter rang out, unburdened by the stresses that weighed so many others down. To Vikram, it was like a lifeline. He had been suffocating under the pressure of it all, and yet here she was, a light amidst the darkness of his struggles. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the noise of the celebration faded. In that instant, Vikram felt a connection. A shared understanding of the immigrant struggle, the weight of expectations, and the desire for something more than just survival. Simon, unaware of the emotional battle playing out across the room, continued dancing. When the music stopped, Vikram found himself walking towards her, nervously asking for her phone number. She agreed with a smile, and as they parted that night, both felt an undeniable spark. But what neither of them knew was that Ravi Mehta, a man who had long learned to exploit such moments of vulnerability, was watching. Standing in the shadows near the registration table, Ravi observed Vikram's hesitance and Simon's warmth. He saw two students on the edge of desperation, caught between the dream of a better life and the harsh reality of what it took to get there. By the end of the evening, Ravi was already calculating how much he could profit from their desperation. This, he knew, was his next big opportunity. Over the next few weeks, Vikram and Simon's connection blossomed naturally. Their late-night study sessions at the Tim Hortons on Queen Street became a ritual. Both exhausted from their multiple jobs, the shared exhaustion was something they could relate to. They spoke in Punjabi, their native tongue, which felt like a balm for their weary souls. It was during these late-night conversations that they found solace in each other's struggles. Vikram, still haunted by the weight of his family's sacrifices, slowly opened up about the relentless pressure he faced. He spoke of his father's trembling hands as he proudly showed off Vikram's textbooks during their video calls, not knowing that his son's academic journey was hanging by a thread. Simon, for her part, spoke of her mother's quiet sacrifice, how she stopped buying herself new clothes, pretending that everything was fine, even as her medical bills piled up. Their shared vulnerability brought them closer. But there was a constant undercurrent of tension. Vikram's student visa was expiring in 5 months, and the reality was beginning to sink in. His grades weren't good enough for the provincial nominee program, and without it, he would have to leave Canada. Simon, ever the optimist, tried to comfort him. "You'll figure it out. There's always a way," she reassured him, even though she too felt the pressure of her impending visa expiration. Unlike many others, she hadn't let the looming deadline crush her spirit. But even she couldn't escape the financial constraints that left her feeling trapped. It was around this time that Ravi Mehta made his approach. One cold November evening, after a community volleyball game at the local recreation center, Vikram found himself walking toward his car when Ravi appeared at his side. Ravi, a familiar face in the community, struck up a conversation, casual at first. "Tough game tonight," he said, taking a step closer to Vikram. "You looked distracted. Everything okay?" Vikram, surprised but polite, replied, "Just tired from work. You know, school's been tough too." Ravi nodded knowingly, his smile practiced, as if he had seen this all before. "I've been watching you, Vikram," Ravi continued. "You've got a lot of weight on your shoulders for someone so young. 5 months left on your visa. Grades not quite good enough for the provincial nominee program. Not enough money for a good immigration lawyer, I bet." Vikram froze, his heart skipping a beat. How did Ravi know? The accurate assessment sent a chill down his spine. He had never confided in Ravi about his immigration struggles. "I help people like you," Ravi said, his tone smooth and comforting. "People who work hard, but get caught in the cracks of the system. There are ways around the traditional routes. Legal ways the government doesn't advertise but definitely allows." Vikram, still processing the revelation, found himself listening closely. "Listen," Ravi said, lowering his voice slightly. "You and that girl, Simon, you both need permanent residency. You care about each other, right? You're practically already a couple. Get married, make it official. The government will process your PR status. It's the easiest way to stay, and it's the quickest path to securing your future here. All it takes is $15,000. I'll take care of everything. The documentation, coaching, the whole package." Vikram felt his stomach churn. $15,000. It was more money than he had made in 8 months of working at the gas station. But Ravi's offer lingered in his mind. $5,000 up front, Ravi added, and $10,000 after the PR is approved. Think about it. Deportation means family shame, Vikram. Wasted sacrifice. Dreams dead at 26. This gives you options. The pressure mounted. Ravi had hit a nerve, tapping into Vikram's greatest fear. Failure. Vikram's thoughts raced as the weight of his family's sacrifices bore down on him. Could he afford this? Was he willing to risk everything to secure a future in Canada? The next few nights, Vikram lay awake on his mattress, staring at the ceiling as Ravi's words echoed in his mind. He could still hear Simon's laughter from their late-night study sessions. He could feel the weight of her expectations, her belief in the future they could build together. Could he protect her from the impending doom of deportation? Was it worth it to deceive her for the sake of their future? It didn't take long before Vikram made his decision. Desperation, coupled with a deep-seated need to give Simon a better life, pushed him into Ravi's arms. 3 days after their conversation, Vikram called Ravi. The wheels of deception began turning. Ravi's coaching sessions started immediately. He provided Vikram with fake employment records, doctored bank statements, and most importantly, a script for their love story. "Immigration wants to believe in love," Ravi explained, sliding documents across his cluttered desk. "Give them a story they can root for. You met at Diwali, bonded over shared culture, fell in love over late-night study sessions. Keep it simple. Keep it romantic. Keep it believable." Vikram didn't have the money yet, but he had a plan. He borrowed from his community, taking loans from 3 different people, each thinking they were the only one helping the desperate student. The pressure was mounting, and the weight of it all began to show. His work hours increased, his sleep decreased, and his grades, already slipping, were now just barely passing. Meanwhile, Simon remained blissfully unaware, her own dreams of building a life in Canada growing stronger each day. As the months passed, Vikram's facade grew increasingly difficult to maintain. His relationship with Simon was blossoming, but beneath the surface, the stress of the lie was slowly eating away at him. Simon, blissfully unaware of the weight Vikram carried, continued to dream of the future they would build together. They went on dates, they traveled, and Simon continued to share her hopes of bringing her parents to Canada, never questioning the deepening silence from Vikram. The pivotal moment came just before Christmas 2023 when Vikram took Simon to Niagara Falls. The winter landscape was breathtaking, a crystalline backdrop to what seemed like a perfectly romantic gesture. But the truth behind Vikram's choice of location was far from innocent. Ravi had suggested it, recommending it as a perfect spot for their immigration application photos. When Simon marveled at the frozen waterfalls, completely captivated, Vikram felt his heart sink further. She had no idea that every gesture was crafted, every moment manufactured for the sake of their immigration fraud. Simon, however, was lost in the moment. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered, wrapping her arms around Vikram as they stood before the falls, the cold air biting at their skin. Vikram's guilt nearly consumed him. "Not the most beautiful," he replied, looking at her face instead, illuminated by the wonder of the moment. For a fleeting second, he genuinely felt that this was real. The connection between them had grown, and there were parts of him that no longer saw the deception. But as soon as the moment passed, the cold reality of what they were doing hit him like a freight train. Simon was falling deeper in love with him, believing their relationship was a love story for the ages, while Vikram was slowly drowning in the lie he had built. Despite the strain, he proposed to her that same afternoon, kneeling in the snow in front of a crowd of unsuspecting tourists. Simon's tears of joy froze on her cheeks as she said yes almost immediately, her face glowing with happiness. They celebrated with their families over FaceTime, and Simon began planning the future she had always dreamed of. But for Vikram, the weight of the lie continued to gnaw at his conscience, his every breath feeling heavier than the last. With each congratulation he received from their community, he felt more like a fraud. He wasn't just deceiving Simon. He was betraying her, her family, and the very people who had believed in him. Yet, despite his guilt, he could not back out now. The engagement party at the local Gurdwara was filled with energy, excitement, and joy. Simon was the center of attention, radiant in her excitement. She talked about their future together, 3 children, a home, and everything they would build. Meanwhile, Vikram nodded, playing the role of the devoted fiancé. But every word felt like an accusation, every smile a reminder of the web of lies he had tangled himself in. Pitt, Simon's roommate, was the only one who noticed the inconsistencies. Vikram's nervous habits began to unravel, forgetting details of his own stories, avoiding certain topics, and constantly checking his phone as though he had something to hide. Pitt didn't want to believe it, but her suspicions grew stronger. She noticed how Vikram would always take calls outside, speaking in whispers, but even she couldn't imagine the scope of the deception that Vikram was perpetrating. When Simon and Vikram's wedding day arrived on February 14, 2024, the anticipation was at its peak. Simon's excitement and joy were palpable as she prepared for the day that would mark the start of their new life together. The Gurdwara, vibrant with color and decoration, echoed with the joyful beats of traditional music. Simon sat surrounded by community members, preparing for her wedding ceremony with henna on her hands and love in her heart. In contrast, Vikram's heart was heavy with guilt. The anticipation of marriage felt more like a march to his own execution. In the men's section of the Gurdwara, Vikram struggled to steady his shaking hands as he tied his turban. His roommates joked about married life, but their words sounded distant, as though they were coming from a world he could no longer connect to. Every blessing, every congratulation, felt like a reminder of what he had done and the life he had created for them both, one that was built on lies. As the ceremony began, Simon stood beside the Guru Granth Sahib, waiting for her future to begin. When their eyes met across the room, her face lit up with pure happiness, and Vikram's chest constricted with guilt. She believed this was their beginning, their shared dream coming true. But for Vikram, it was the end of everything he had worked so hard to hide. Each step they took around the holy book marked a vow, a promise of unity, but for Vikram, each step felt like a personal betrayal. His feelings of shame swirled with the pride that Simon radiated. As they exchanged vows, Simon squeezed his hand tighter, tears streaming down her cheeks. The joy she felt was real, but for Vikram, it was an excruciating reminder of the deception he had been hiding all along. The weight of it all pressed down on him, but as they said their vows and married, Vikram had no choice but to continue playing his part. The days that followed their wedding were a blur of happiness and guilt for Vikram. Simon, in her joyful naivety, dove headfirst into their new life together, planning for their future with excitement and optimism. They moved into their modest apartment, where Simon transformed it into a home. She filled it with fairy lights, warm meals, and a sense of comfort that made Vikram feel both grateful and suffocated by the weight of his lies. Simon woke up early every morning to pack Vikram's lunch, humming with contentment. Her routine was a rhythm that made Vikram's guilt deepen with each passing day. The love she showered on him, the way she smiled at him, and the simple joy she found in their small, quiet life filled him with a sorrow that he couldn't escape. He had become the man she trusted, but he was also the man who had destroyed everything she believed in. But the true consequences of Vikram's actions started to surface when the immigration interviews loomed. 3 weeks after their wedding, they sat across from the immigration officer, both trying to present themselves as the perfect couple. The officer, calm and methodical, asked them about their relationship, testing their story with carefully worded questions. "How did you know she was the one?" the officer asked Vikram. Vikram's answer was genuine for the first time in weeks, though it was wrapped in lies. "Her laugh," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The first time I heard her laugh, I knew I wanted to protect that happiness forever." The officer gave them a knowing nod and approved their application. Simon was ecstatic. Her dream of bringing her parents to Canada, of building a future with Vikram, was within reach. But for Vikram, the weight of the approval was suffocating. He was drowning in debt, constantly working double shifts to pay off the money he owed, while his panic attacks grew more frequent. The stress was starting to take a physical toll on him, his body shaking uncontrollably at times, his thoughts spiraling out of control. Simon noticed the changes in him, his shortness of breath, his restlessness. She didn't understand the cause, but she could see the strain. She began to question why Vikram would sometimes leave the apartment, speaking in hushed tones when he thought she wasn't listening. It wasn't like the Vikram she had married. She noticed how often he checked his phone, as if waiting for something or someone. But every time she asked, he brushed it off with a smile or a quick change of subject. It was Pitt, Simon's sharp-eyed roommate, who first began to piece together the puzzle. She noticed the oddities. The way Vikram sometimes forgot details in his stories, the way he became defensive whenever she asked him about his calls. Pitt's suspicion grew stronger, but she couldn't bring herself to fully confront Simon about what she feared. Instead, she quietly observed, taking note of the inconsistencies in Vikram's behavior. As weeks passed, Pitt became more determined to uncover the truth. Her suspicions peaked one evening when she overheard Vikram on the phone. "I need more time for the final payment," Vikram said, his voice low but anxious. A man's voice responded. Contract was clear. "Vikram, you got what you paid for, your wife and immigration approval." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Pitt immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She began to investigate quietly, following Vikram's movements and watching him meet with Ravi, the man who had introduced him to the dark world of immigration fraud. The breakthrough came when Pitt discovered text messages on Vikram's phone. The messages spoke of the final payment and the services rendered by Ravi's operation. That's when Pitt decided it was time to confront Simon. Pitt gathered all the evidence, photos, recordings, text messages, and spread them out on their old apartment floor. Simon walked in to find everything laid bare before her. The color drained from her face as she processed the truth. Every romantic gesture, every shared moment, every promise Vikram had made to her. Everything was tainted by the dark reality of their relationship. "Explain this," Pitt said quietly, sliding a message across the table. Vikram's world collapsed in that moment. All his careful lies, his genuine love, everything crumbled under the weight of documented truth. Simon's heart shattered as she read through the evidence. She had been so naive, so trusting, and now, everything she had believed in was nothing more than a carefully crafted deception. The man she had married wasn't the person she thought he was. He had not just broken her heart. He had ruined her life, tied her to a crime that would destroy her future. Simon looked up at Vikram, her eyes cold and calculating, something that he had never seen before. $15,000, she said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. "That's what I'm worth to you." Vikram's voice trembled as he tried to explain, but Simon wasn't listening anymore. She had heard enough. The lies had been exposed, and the man she had trusted was no longer the person standing in front of her. She had been an accomplice in his scheme, and now she had to face the consequences. Days passed in a tense silence between Simon and Vikram. The weight of betrayal hung heavily in the air, but Simon kept her calm, even as her heart shattered with every glance she exchanged with him. She had been broken by his lies, but something inside her had shifted. The gentle, trusting woman who had once dreamed of a future with him was now gone. In her place was a woman who understood the power of revenge. Vikram, on the other hand, was drowning in his guilt, unable to escape the reality of what he had done. Each day felt like a countdown to the inevitable, and Simon knew that the time for action had come. She had spent the last few days gathering evidence, photographs, recordings, text messages, and financial records. Every conversation they had, every interaction with Ravi, and every little slip-up Vikram made was meticulously documented. Simon wasn't just planning to confront Vikram. She was preparing to take down the entire operation. What Vikram didn't realize was that Simon wasn't just seeking justice for herself. She was seeking it for every woman Ravi had exploited and every student he had betrayed. Ravi was the one who had manipulated him, made him believe that betraying Simon was the only way to secure a future. But now Simon was in control. She reached out to Pitt, who, after careful consideration, agreed to help. Pitt was a natural at gathering information, and with Simon's guidance, they began to work together to expose Ravi's entire network. They needed the evidence to destroy not just Vikram's future but Ravi's entire operation. The stakes were high, and both women knew they were risking everything by confronting the truth. But it had to be done. As they meticulously went through the evidence Simon had collected, they realized the extent of Ravi's scheme. He wasn't just a consultant. He was a predator who had been taking advantage of the desperation and fear that international students like Vikram and Simon faced. His operation was larger than they had anticipated, and the damage he had caused was beyond repair. Ravi had destroyed the lives of young students who had come to Canada with nothing but hope and dreams of a better future. Simon's plan was set into motion, and the final step was now clear. She would confront Ravi with Vikram and Pitt by her side. But this confrontation would be different. It wouldn't be about explaining herself or finding a resolution. It would be about exposing the truth and taking back control. Vikram, for his part, still couldn't comprehend what was happening. His mind was clouded with confusion and guilt, but there was something in Simon's eyes that told him he had underestimated her. Simon knew this would be the moment when everything would come to a head. The confrontation was inevitable, and she was ready. What she didn't realize, however, was how much her calm composure would unravel the man she once loved. The evening air was crisp and cold as Vikram walked home from his late shift at the gas station. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Simon. The simple text read, "We need to talk." The knot in his stomach tightened as he read the message. He had been dreading this moment for days, knowing it was coming, but still hoping that somehow, some way, he could salvage what was left of their relationship. He had no idea how much had already been set in motion. As he entered their small, shared apartment, the tension was palpable. Simon sat at the kitchen table, the evidence folder placed carefully in front of her. Pitt was there too, sitting silently in the corner, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The scene was far from what Vikram had imagined for his first real conversation with Simon about their future together. He noticed the kitchen knife on the counter, its presence seeming almost intentional. "Vikram," Simon began, her voice calm but firm. "I've been thinking about us." Vikram nodded, his throat dry. He stepped closer to the table, desperate for some semblance of hope. "Simon, I forgive you," she interrupted, her words ringing cold. The words Vikram had longed to hear suddenly felt like a trap. "But we need to fix this properly. Together." He nearly collapsed in relief, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would be the chance to undo the damage. His relief, however, was short-lived. Simon slid the folder across the table. "Explain this," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The smile Vikram had worn faded as his eyes fell on the pile of documents. He immediately recognized the financial records, the photographs, and most importantly, the message from Ravi. This is not what you think," Vikram stammered, his mind scrambling for an explanation. "I was desperate. I never meant to hurt you." Simon didn't flinch. "You made me an accomplice to fraud. You used me, Everything we built together was a lie, Vikram. Her words hit him like a physical blow. Simon, I was under pressure. I thought I was doing what was right, what was needed to survive here. Simon's calm demeanor cracked for a second, a flicker of anger lighting her eyes. Survive? Is that what this was about? I trusted you. I believed in us. And you destroyed me. Vikram's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to reach out to her, to beg her to understand, but he knew it was too late. He had lost her trust, and now the truth was exposed. Simon stood up slowly, her body tense. You should have come to me, Vikram, but now you've crossed the line. It's not just about you and me anymore. Vikram glanced over at Pitt, whose expression was unreadable. She knew. She had known all along. The crushing weight of guilt overwhelmed him. He had been so sure that this would work out, that he could fix everything, but Simon had seen through him. She had turned the tables in ways he hadn't expected. Simon's next words made his blood run cold. I've been gathering evidence, Vikram. I've been recording everything. I know everything. He looked at her, speechless. She had been building a case against him for months, and now it was too late to back out. You've destroyed my future, Vikram, Simon said, her voice icy with the kind of calmness that came only with the certainty of having lost everything. I'm going to turn all of this over to Immigration Canada tomorrow. This ends tonight. Vikram felt the walls closing in on him. Desperation and panic surged through him. He grabbed the folder, scattering the papers across the room. Simon, please. No, she said, her voice firm. This is justice. You won't hurt anyone else the way you've hurt me. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Vikram couldn't think clearly, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to fix this. But it was too late. Simon had already taken control. I've been recording everything, Pitt added, breaking the silence. This conversation, every lie you've told, it's all on tape. Vikram's face drained of color. His entire world was collapsing. Ravi's words echoed in his mind. You think your little wife won't face criminal charges? Simon's transformation was complete. The innocent girl he had once known was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned the power of manipulation, of control, of revenge. He was just a pawn in her game now, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Simon's voice was steady and final. It's over, Vikram. And in that moment, Vikram knew his life was about to change forever. The clock ticked relentlessly towards 9:23 p.m. Simon stood in the middle of the apartment, every fiber of her being focused on the task at hand. The evidence, now scattered across the room, was her weapon. Every document, every photo, every recorded conversation was a testament to the deception and betrayal that had consumed the past several months of her life. Vikram, trembling, watched as she placed the folder back on the table, the weight of its contents hanging in the air like a guillotine. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the rustling of the papers and the sound of their breaths as they each prepared for the next move. Ravi, who had remained quiet and observant up to this point, finally spoke. His tone had shifted, no longer the calm, calculated demeanor of the man who had orchestrated the entire fraud operation. What's this? He asked, his voice growing tight. The nervousness was creeping in, and Vikram could see it. Ravi was now realizing the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about Vikram and Simon anymore. This was bigger. This was his empire, his livelihood, now on the line. Simon's eyes never wavered. This is the future of every student you've destroyed, she said softly. Every single one. Your fraudulent operation ends here, tonight. Vikram could feel the weight of Simon's words crash into him, his heart racing faster than his mind could process. His lies, his deceit, everything he had done to survive in Canada had led them to this moment. The room seemed to close in on him as the truth about his actions crashed down on him, suffocating him. Ravi stepped forward, his eyes darting between Vikram and Simon. His face twisted with rage as he lunged at the folder Simon had placed on the table. You think you can destroy me? He spat, voice full of venom. You have no idea what you're dealing with. In that moment, something inside Simon snapped. She had spent months in the dark, digesting the betrayal, the lies, and the weight of a system that had failed her. But now, she was no longer the innocent girl who had come to Canada with hope in her heart. She was a woman who had learned to fight back. Simon stood up, her calm demeanor replaced with a quiet fury that Vikram had never seen before. The knife on the counter gleamed under the dim light, its blade catching a reflection of the room's chaos. Simon's hand slowly reached out and closed around the handle. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The final act was coming. "Step back, Ravi," she said, her voice cold. "No one is leaving this apartment until the police arrive. No more lies. No more games." Ravi's eyes widened in disbelief, and for a brief moment, Simon could see the predator in him recoil. But there was no turning back now. He had cornered them both. He had manipulated their lives for too long, and now it was his turn to face the consequences. Vikram, caught between his wife and the man who had exploited both of them, stood frozen. He wanted to intervene, to stop it, to fix everything. But he couldn't. The magnitude of his actions, the depth of the lies he had told Simon, left him paralyzed. This was his mess, and now his marriage was on the line. "Simon, please," Vikram begged, his voice shaking with desperation. "We can fix this. We can—" "No," Simon cut him off, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You can't fix this. We're done." The apartment felt smaller with every passing second. The air was thick with tension, and the unspoken fear that hung in the room was suffocating them all. Ravi, now fully aware that his empire was crumbling, charged forward, his hands outstretched to seize the evidence. But Simon was faster. She stepped in front of him, her grip on the knife tightening. "You're not getting away," she whispered, her voice cold as ice. And then chaos erupted. Ravi lunged at her, hands desperate to disarm her, to take control. Simon, in an instant of clarity, reacted without thinking. The knife came down, a blur of motion in the darkness. It was a split-second decision, and the consequences were immediate. Ravi's cry echoed through the apartment as the struggle escalated. Pitt, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward, pulling her phone from her pocket. She had been recording everything from the start. This was no accident. The final act had been set in motion, and there would be no turning back. Vikram could barely comprehend what was happening. The room was filled with screams, with curses, with pleas. He was watching his life unravel before his eyes, a helpless observer to the carnage he had unwittingly set in motion. Ravi collapsed to the floor, his face contorted in pain, and Simon stood over him, breath coming in short gasps. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The confrontation had escalated beyond anything they had all imagined. The knife gleamed ominously in the dim light as Simon backed away, her eyes fixed on Ravi, her heart racing. The act of self-defense, of taking control, was done. But the consequences, both immediate and far-reaching, would not be so easily erased. The sounds of sirens grew louder outside, signaling the arrival of the police, but Simon knew the damage had already been done. This was no longer just about her immigration status or Vikram's lies. This was a story of survival, a story of justice, however twisted, finally being served. The wail of the sirens grew deafening as the police arrived on the scene. Officer Sarah Mitchell, a 10-year veteran, had seen her share of crime scenes, but nothing quite like this. The small apartment was still filled with the remnants of the chaos that had just unfolded. Bloodstains, overturned furniture, and, most hauntingly, the scattered documents, immigration papers, fraudulent marriage contracts, and financial records, painted a grim picture of desperation and betrayal. Detective Mitchell stood at the door, taking in the scene with a grim sense of disbelief. The community she had known so well was in pieces. A multicultural mix of students, immigrants, and workers, all seeking to build a new life in Canada, now caught in a web of exploitation, fraud, and murder. The immigrant dream, which for so long had been their hope, had turned into a nightmare for all involved. Inside the apartment, Vikram sat motionless, his hands trembling, staring at the floor where Ravi's body lay. The tension in the air was palpable. His mind raced as the police moved in and started to secure the scene. What had started as a desperate plan to survive, a decision to go along with Ravi's fraudulent scheme, had spiraled into violence. His life, Simon's, and Ravi's were now inextricably linked by the blood on the floor. But there was more to the story, much more. As the investigators sifted through the evidence, the true scale of the operation came to light. The financial records revealed an entire network of fake marriages, forged documents, and a highly organized scheme orchestrated by Ravi. He had been exploiting the most vulnerable members of the immigrant community, charging exorbitant fees for his services, promising them permanent residency at the cost of their dignity, safety, and freedom. As Vikram was led out in handcuffs, the weight of the situation began to sink in. He was a pawn in Ravi's twisted game, but in the eyes of the law he was just as guilty. The fraud he had been complicit in, his participation in the scheme, the forged documents, and the deception, was enough to land him behind bars. The immigration fraud case had gone from a simple crime to a full-blown federal investigation. Ravi's operation had exposed the cracks in the immigration system, the flaws that allowed these schemes to thrive. But the true twist in this tragic tale was Simon. As the police continued their investigation, Simon sat quietly in the back of an ambulance, her face pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and pain. The trauma of the evening, the betrayal, the violence, it had all caught up with her. But deep inside, a part of her was calm, detached. She had planned this all along. From the moment Vikram's lies had been exposed, she knew there was no going back. She had found herself in a world where survival meant facing the consequences head-on, where justice wasn't handed to you, it had to be taken. The evidence she had carefully gathered, the recordings, the photos, the financial documents, would serve as the foundation for the case that would break Ravi's entire operation wide open. She had set the wheels of justice in motion, but the cost was high. The next few months would be a blur of legal proceedings, media coverage, and public scrutiny. But Simon was ready. As she looked out the ambulance window, watching the flashing lights disappear behind her, she knew the story wasn't over. She had taken the first step in dismantling the system that had destroyed her, Vikram, and countless others. But it came at a price. Vikram, with his debt and desperation, had allowed himself to be trapped by Ravi's manipulation. Simon had once been the trusting romantic, the girl who believed in love and fairness. But now, she was something else. Hardened, calculating, and determined to see justice through, no matter the personal cost. As for Ravi, his empire of lies and exploitation crumbled. The police would soon arrest him, but the damage was already done. He had made his money on the backs of the vulnerable, and now he would face the consequences. He had underestimated Simon. He thought he was the predator, but in the end, he became the prey. The media would sensationalize the case, of course. Headlines would scream about the murder, the fraudulent marriages, the exploitation of students, and the emotional toll it took on the immigrant community. But beyond the headlines, beyond the scandal, was the deeper story of a broken system that had turned the Canadian dream into a nightmare for so many. Simon's story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming agency in a world that had tried to crush her. It was about standing up, even when the world told you that your dreams were nothing more than illusions. And in the cold aftermath of that Valentine's Day massacre, in the blood and tears that stained the floor of that tiny apartment, one thing was clear. The immigrant experience was no longer just about survival. It was about the fight for justice, for truth, and for a chance to build a life free from exploitation. As the dust settled in the aftermath of the violent confrontation, Confronting was left to grapple with the consequences. Ravi's empire crumbled as Simon, now hardened by betrayal and trauma, ensured his operation would never prey on others again. Vikram, caught between his feelings for Simon and his desperation to survive, faced the harsh reality of his involvement in the fraud. Their marriage, built on lies, was irrevocably broken. Simon had turned from the trusting girl to the avenger who sought justice at any cost. With Ravi's arrest and the authorities uncovering the extent of his fraudulent network, the case became a symbol for many. It was a tragic reminder of the exploitation immigrants faced, the lengths they would go to for the Canadian dream, and the dark side of a system that failed to protect its most vulnerable. Simon's path, from hopeful romantic to calculating avenger, was a stark illustration of what desperation, betrayal, and revenge could do to a person. And while justice would be served in the courts, the true reckoning lay in the hearts of those who had been victims of this system, the ones who had been crushed under the weight of promises made and broken. The story didn't just end with Ravi's downfall or Vikram's guilt. It was a call to action for all of us, reminding us to look beyond the surface and question the systems that govern our lives. For those who have been exploited, who feel trapped, who are fighting for a better life, remember, no one is truly powerless unless they allow themselves to be. Let's change the narrative. Let's support systems that protect, not exploit. If you've ever felt betrayed by a system, if you've ever struggled under the weight of impossible expectations, know that you are not alone. Reach out. Stand up. Together, we can build a world where justice prevails, and no one is forced to sacrifice their dignity for a dream. Remember to subscribe, share your thoughts, and keep the conversation going. We need to talk about the real cost of the immigrant experience and how we can make it better for everyone.